All right. So, thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate it. Welcome to the latest episode of Birds and Bytes, and probably more importantly, our first program for the year of the Peregrine. Yay! Feel free to put your Zoom applause and confetti in the chat. I am super, super excited about this program and in general about the year of the Peregrine. I hope most of you guys, by joining this program, are already familiar with our year-long campaign to celebrate Chicago's official city bird. I could get into all the details about why they're really cool birds and their whole history behind why they are the official city bird, but I'd honestly just encourage you just go to our website, visit the blog, come to programs like this, and you get nuggets. But the short version is 25 years ago, after a major vote involving 40,000 ballots cast by you, Chicagoans, the public decided that the peregrine falcon was going to be the official city bird of Chicago. Now, the funny thing about that is that a lot of people are not really aware of that designation or even the history behind it, or for that matter, even the history of peregrine falcons, both in Illinois and Chicago, which is a relationship that runs really, really deep. And so this year, in honor of that 25th year, we're excited to celebrate our official city bird and officially mark this major milestone as our official city bird. So with that in mind, we brought together an incredible series of programs that are going to be taking place all year round. I'm going to drop the link in the chat, so definitely hit that link and check out all the other things we got going on. But I figured we'd start things right with none other than the legendary Mary Hennen, who is the director of Chicago Peregrine Program and one of the many people who were seriously involved in the recovery of peregrine falcons in Chicago and Illinois. And I can't think of any better person to kick things off for us here with Year of the Peregrine. So I'm super excited to bring her to you guys this evening. Couple of quick notes. Like I mentioned, we are recording this program, so please make sure you're muted. Don't be that person who is running their dishwasher in the background of a virtual program. You just don't want to be that person, all right? Additionally, we will ask that you keep your questions till the end. If you have questions that come up, feel free to put them in the chat, and then we'll address them at the end, and we'll go through as they come in. And once again, this is a program of the Chicago Ornithological Society. Birds and Bytes is our ongoing virtual program series and is serving as the conduit for the Year of Peregrine here today. So these are all free programs, open to the public, year-round events. If you're interested in supporting any of these free programs, seriously consider becoming a member, because that's what allows us to keep doing awesome stuff like this. Pretty cheap membership is like the best one around, just saying. So with that said, I think I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mary and let her take it away here and get us started on the Year of the Peregrine. Go for it, Mary.
All right. Thanks, Edward. That was very nice things he says about me, and it's a way of saying she's older than dirt, but that's okay. I've been around a long time. And let's make sure I can, and I'm not texting great, so we're going to be sharing the screen. And then another funny thing, and I tell too many stories, they occurred to me. The original vote for the city bird was for a 4-year term of office. And as a, sure Chicago politician, it's found a way to stay in office for 25 years when it was supposed to be a 4-year term. All right, we're going to, everybody see the main slide for the share my screen? Yeah, we're all good. Okay, great. So yeah, we're celebrating the 25th year of the Peregrine, and thank you very much for having me to start that off. You guys know me, you know I love to talk peregrines. I tell too many stories, so I hope you're all comfy with your beverage that you have there. And I was trying to figure out how to tell their story. Let's not just do the 25th anniversary, but let's actually start and give a little background history of what happened to the peregrines, and then talk about where we are today and that. And I was trying to think of ways to show how time has progressed in that. And let's see, I've shared the screen, but it doesn't want to go forward to the next picture slide. Let's see. There we go. All right. So how do I show the passage of time? And other than, my first thought was I could show how my hair is grayed in these 40 years. But, then I came up with cell phones and how when we were releasing, they were these massive things that nobody had. And they were This was donated by the phone company for an emergency thing. I'm happy about some kind of emergency there. To now where they're in everybody's pocket and used for everything. You're lost without them. And then you have crazy people, and you guys all know this guy hanging out on the 38th floor ledge while adult peregrines are swooping at him, and he's trying to take a selfie of himself with a peregrine chick. And that's what's in the white circle. So you can kid Josh next time you guys see Josh. All right, being birders, you guys know what peregrines are, but just a little sort of recap. They're a mid-sized raptor. They're found on every continent except Antarctica. They're a historically cliff-dwelling bird. They exhibit what we call reverse sexual dimorphism, which is just a fancy way of saying girls are bigger than boys. And you look at the pair of the two of them, the males in the background, they call a male peregrine a tiercel. It means a third. He's not a third of her size. He's just the third smaller. And you see this in size difference in all birds of prey. So your hawks, falcons, eagles, owls all exhibit. Plumage, we have immature on the left with brown vertical streaking. Adults are on the right with the slate gray back with barring on the front. They all have that characteristic mallard cheek stripe down the side of the face. And they're known for the speeds of over 200 miles an hour. They're aerial hunters, and when they stoop and dive after prey, that's when they get those large speeds. If we want to look at where the population was at when they were elected a city bird, here's a map, and you guys are familiar with eBird. So this is just an eBird capture of sighting for that year, but it's pretty reflective of the population where it was at. And that's not bad. If you want to jump forward to where we're at now, we're hip deep in them, and they're everywhere on that. So looking forward, great. If we want to look back, though, and we reverse 25 years, this is what we get. We get on that. Even going a little further back to tell their story. In the mid-1960s, you had a North American population that was down to 11% of historic levels. They were wiped out in the Midwest and the eastern part of the U.S. They call that extirpated. You have remnant populations in the western part of the U.S., and you were seeing a decline all over. Where you did have pairs still trying to nest, what you were finding were crushed eggshells or egg fragments and that, and they were failing. I love them as being the peregrines being an illustration of the importance of what my main job is working with natural history collections. If we didn't have peregrine eggs from the 1800s to compare with those cracked fragments we were finding and wait and go, wait a minute, these fragments are so much thinner than your old eggs, would we have discovered the problem with DDT? What it does, that's a pesticide that was used in the 1940s to spray on the crops, dead bugs, little songbirds eat that, you work up the food chain and the body's not able to break it down. And what it does is it inhibits calcium production. So the females were laying eggs that were way too thin and they weren't able to make it through the weight of the adult sitting on them to incubate. And in discovering this and efforts to restore peregrines, keep in mind that they were always also helping other species, that bald eagles and brown pelicans and other things that were in decline. So where you had peregrines still trying to nest, you could rappel down to that eyrie, and that's just the fancy way of saying cliff nest. You could put out fake eggs so the parents stay incubating, take the real ones into the lab, safely hatch them. You're feeding them with the puppets, the picture in the upper right, because you don't want them to imprint on people. And when they're 10 days old, you could rappel back to the nest and put them in, and the adults will take them. Well, that will help, and it's a slow process. But what do you do in that whole Midwest and eastern part of the U.S. where you didn't have any birds? And the answer happened to lie in the ability of these birds to be able to learn how to hunt on their own, and equally having them in captivity. So for the Midwest, the falconers were our main source of the birds used to release. So you can breed them in captivity. You're using techniques, they call it hacking, that essentially like a nest site, and you're being the parent without them seeing the parent. And that equally important, and I don't want to overlook it, is the importance of them being listed as an endangered species. So extra levels of protection, federal protection, and consequences if you were to harm them. People might not know what a peregrine falcon is, but they know what it means to be an endangered species. So it's just huge on that. So Illinois joined the Midwest when it was already releasing birds. It's actually started in the East Coast with the Peregrine Fund, which is now at the Bird Center for the Worlds of Prey in Boise, Idaho, but at that time it was out of Cornell. Midwest started in the early 80s. Chicago and Illinois started in the mid 1980s. I was at the Chicago Academy of Sciences at that time, and predecessors to me were the ones who began this program. But I don't want to think of it as a Chicago thing or as an Illinois thing. Think of each hack site as a nest site that you're helping on a regional basis. Note the picture on the left, see the little chimney on the box? That's the delayed feeder. That's how we're able to feed those birds without them seeing us doing it. Remember, we want to keep these wild birds and not dependent on people. So we would get young when they were about a week before fledging, and this was all coordinated through the Raptor Center in Minnesota. And they would get it through the different breeders, and when they had them at the right age and combo, they would ship them down to us. They were put in this hack box. The front is closed. That's why you see the barring on the upper one, to get them, to calm down from being flown out in carriers and whatnot, and then to get used to feeding, at that site. And again, we fed them through that delayed feeder that was on top. The lower picture, what you're sort of looking in the box before the birds are in it, and showing it, there's a trap door in there. There's a little hidey hole that we're going to use later. You put them in there, you close the front, and there were holes in the box so we could observe them that week before we opened the door. We want to make sure that they're fine, that they're eating and everything else. When it came time to the day to actually open the box, you'd grab them out one at a time. And the bird on the left, you can see has a red skull and a yellow on it. You can spray paint this little indicator with a non-toxic thing. It was just an easier way of keeping track of each individual rather than trying to read the bands. We put out a couple days supply, so we don't have to go up there the next morning and fledge them or prematurely fledge them, let them be able to eat and calm down. Everybody gets down, you get situated, you can watch, and you spring the trap door, and essentially that's it. They're free, they're released. They're going to spend like 3 weeks at that site, learning how to fly and hunt on their own. When you start seeing them do behaviors like taking the prey away and mantling it from the other birds and grabbing at a tree and plucking the leaves off, it's mimicking the hunting behaviors like an adult peregrine would do to its chick. You feed it a little less and a little less, and they essentially, when they start wandering further out and feeding on their own, they're gone. The hope was that they were going to repopulate these historic cliff hybrids, and they didn't show up at them. So I don't want to discount and say that didn't happen at all. But when you look at where the population is now, they're using the urban habitat. And when you think about it, the city is nothing but a pseudo cliff. It had ample prey in all our migrant and our resident birds. It had no competition back in the early days for use of these ledges. It was just a perfect place for them to be utilizing. The first building that we had used after the decline, so we had no peregrines in Illinois from 1951 to 1987, was this site I call Wacker Site. So we're just north of the Sears Tower, and the Sears Tower was up at that point. Well, Willis Tower, I'm old, like I said, so I'm going to use the old names for the buildings. It's not the height that they're looking for. They want to be on the side, and it's the architecture of the ledge itself. When they're sitting, if they're sitting on eggs, can they see up and around in the surrounding area? If the only way they can look is straight up, they're not going to like that. They're more vulnerable from that viewpoint. Are they out of prevailing winds? Is there any kind of substrate to lay the eggs in? This was just, I couldn't have picked a nicer place for them to pick. By the way, if you look at that arrow, there's a little gray door that I can now go out. Vicki Beyer, who was the ornithologist before me, on that, see where the brown or the gray fans are at the top? We used to have to drop a rope ladder from the top and go down to access that ledge. I never got to do that fun part. They put in a door for me. And if something you guys can all put in the chat, if you remember the first peregrine you ever saw, this is the first peregrine I ever saw. Her name was Harriet. She's the one who started nesting at that building. She was hacked out in Minnesota. She mated with Jingles, who was one of the first Chicago release birds. But I saw her at that site, and she stooped on a yellow-belly sapsucker. So that was my first view ever of peregrines. At that time period, if you looked at the city and you're trying to figure out how many peregrine families do you think we can support, our goal was to have 3 nesting pairs in the state. The second pair that showed up after Harriet, and this is the sort of map of their territory, they had territory from Irving Park and Lakeshore Drive all the way up to Loyola. They ended up nesting on a building, I called it Broadway, so you were north of Hollywood, but you had over 5 miles as a territory. Keep in mind, at that goal, Illinois is a plain state. It's not a cliff state, so we didn't have a huge population to get with. Did we underestimate it a little bit? Yep. You look at the map and how many we have. And there's more than we know about, but these are the pairs that we know about. And if I look at how much territory they're taking, at this point we had 6 nesting pairs in a quarter mile. In fact, I've got them nesting across the street from each other. They're going to work this out on their own. And think of the city just like a river with a ton of little crazy turns into that. If I'm on one building and I go off to the north and you're on the one across the street and you're on to the south, we can essentially, our place where we're laying eggs are abutting, but we're hunting in different directions on that. So the population has just exploded and is doing great. As you had the birds coming back and everything, and your population at that level, you sort of shifted from the releases to monitoring the population that's you're now nesting birds. So let's walk actually through a nesting season and see the things that we deal with and what's involved in that way. So each year we want to identify them, and it's you guys actually, the birders and the photographers, who might say, hey, I've seen peregrine hanging on the building, and you send me this kind of picture, and it's a dramatic picture and it's a wonderful picture and I love the picture, but what I like more is if you would send me this picture. If I could get the bands and we can ring them, we can learn so much about their longevity and their dispersal. You could study differences in individual behaviors. I can tell you I had a female that was holding 2 different sites as part of her territory. She would be with one male at one and one with the other, and each subsequent year she'd switch up which site she was actually laying eggs at. If I didn't have them banded to know it was the same bird, you could question that sort of happening. So walking, and before I get onto the season, if you look at where we're coming from, this sort of goes back to, if I talk about a hack site as a place, as a dispersal from a nest, and you're keeping it regional, that Illinois is helping Wisconsin, Wisconsin's helping Indiana. You look at the origin of where our peregrines came from, you can see that regional dispersal. So all the blue dots are natal sites of birds that have come to bred in Illinois. If I told you that females disperse further than males, and then it therefore follows that we find a higher percentage of males showing up in our area, and that if I look at the graph on the bottom, and I look at about 40% of the birds that I'm looking at as our adult breeders are unbanded. Now, it's not just that they're from places I don't know, but it could be inaccessible eyries, so I do know where they are in that. And then I look at that, okay, the majority of those unbanded ones are males. Then I think, okay, most of them are coming from around me and I need to find more peregrine nests. It's a long way of saying, help me find peregrine nests. All right, let's walk through that season like I promised. Right now we're in courtship. So February, March is courtship. You have ledge displays, you have aerial displays, they'll be exchanging food. If any of you guys got Merlin on your phone and you could go through the calls and that, you could eat chupping as a common vocalization for courtship. The cack, 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 cack is more of an alarm sort of call. I'm talking about the birds and what we learn from monitoring, but a huge job of what we do or what my role is to be the liaison or the ambassador from the peregrine to the building. So we're in courtship now and they're getting defensive of the site where they want to lay eggs. So this is our St. Mary's site. They want to remove the signs that's in the circle to change the logo on that. Well, they've been working with this for years and they host the peregrines. They love them. They've postponed it to the fall, which is easy. But part of my job is to help sites or contractors say that's a hospital and that was critical equipment in that program or on that roof in that corner where that sign is. How do I help them be able to do that and deal with the birds? So if you look at the upper thing and the star is where the peregrine's nesting and the X is where you go out, well, common things. Don't go out to the right and walk past the nest. Go the long way around the block. You hug the building. You don't walk out in the center. It's commonplace things, but again, my job is just to help it make it easier for you to live with these peregrines that are on your building. All right, we're at egg laying time is usually somewhere mid-March, end of March. 30 years ago, it was April. It's been moving a little earlier. They make a nest called a scrape. It's just a slight depression in whatever substrate's there. They'll lay one egg over 24 to 48 hours. Typically, don't start doing a full incubation until about the third egg is laid, where the clutch is nearly complete. Obviously, as the weather's cold, they might sit on a little bit, but not heavy to the end. Both the males and the females will incubate eggs. If you thought we were done with snow, we're not done with snow. There's always at least one snowfall, and it might be light after peregrines have laid eggs, and they haven't laid their eggs yet. Here we're at Rockford, and they have a wonderful webcam that's beautiful. It's hosted by Sinisippi Audubon, and they're the ones that monitor and take care of these pair and everything. And okay, when you see this logo pop up, it's sort of a teaser to say, hey, there's something coming up on the COS celebrations involving this topic. So Jennifer, who is the head of taking care of the Peregrine Rockfords or Rockford Peregrines, and then is going to be talking in June, and you'll want to hear more about these pair. And Google Rockford Peregrine webcam and get to it. It's a great one to watch. Unfortunately, we can have a lot of rain. This in a way is worse to me than the snow, and this is the saddest picture I've ever seen in the world. Not all sites are inaccessible, and this was using a gutter. Think about a gutter. It has all the characteristics I told you peregrines like on the side out of the wind where they can see around to their surroundings. But this one didn't have drainage, and they could roll the eggs to a high point, but we just had so much consecutive rain that it just flooded out on that. So nature happens. Luckily, she did end up nesting, so I could tell you a good story. She did raise young after that. Now, the behavior of the adults during incubation, this is a female. If a male was on the eggs and I approached him, he would take off and fly off, and he lets her come in. That's one of the advantages of the difference in size. She's the bigger defender of the nest. If you're wondering what's going on in this picture, I was grabbing eggs so we could measure them. We had inbred pairs at the time, and I wanted to see if there was any difference between in the egg size and shape and whatnot from related pairs to unrelated pairs. So the month has gone by, we're now getting close to Mother's Day, around Mother's Day, and then you get hatching. Because you had that delayed incubation, they pretty much hatch within a day or so of each other. You could have it spread out. And also because of delaying that incubation, the first egg laid tends to be the one that's out exposed to the temperatures the most, and you could often see that one adult. When it comes to batting, we would collect that egg. And this is when the defensiveness of the adults just goes off the roof and to high care. This is usually when we find more of the nest sites, because suddenly you get an engineer, hey, I went out to check the air conditioning unit and I'm being attacked. It's coming after me. It's, well, the peregrines were nice and quiet while they were sitting on the eggs, and once they hatch and they have young, it just goes off the rails. Now, females do all the behavior called brooding for the most part. It's tucking the chicks under. At this size, they're not able to thermal regulate. So she's either keeping them warm or she's shading them. She's keep trying to hatch that last egg or so. So she's tucking that in the back. Now, if I told you peregrines live to 20 and they normally start breeding at 2 years of age, what's wrong with the picture on the left? It's in immature plumage. And so that's a 1-year-old bird. Back in the day when we didn't have a lot of birds nesting and there wasn't any competition, you pretty much, if you wanted to territory in a building, you could get one. We saw a lot of young birds trying to nest. Nowadays, I don't see that too often because they can't compete at that egg for the more experienced breeder. On the other end of the age spectrum, I no longer see as many 16, 17-year-old adults breeding. Somewhere around the age of 13, 14, they usually outcompeted for that territory by a younger bird. Male does a lot of the hunting for the family, and they will cache food. That means they hunt extra and they will tuck it in to places. I love this one of you're in the Uptown Theater and he's tucking a red-winged blackbird into a little crevice and a chink in the brick. We're at the age of the chicks being 21 to 24 days old. This is perfect age for banding. They're as big as they're going to get. So physically, I don't really have to worry that the leg is going to outgrow the band. If there's any doubt, you put a female band on because it's larger. Yet they don't have their flight feathers in. See all the little browns starting to peek out on the edges? They're just starting to emerge. So I don't really have to worry about prematurely fledging this guy out of the nest. This is my favorite work picture ever. Remember that aggressive adult? Well, how do you deal with the aggressive adult, but you get the chick for banding? Well, this is crazy way is how you do it. They want to hit the high point. I'm sure a lot of you have been bopped in the head by red-winged blackbirds. Peregrines are essentially doing the same thing, but they want to hit the high point. So you invert a whisk broom, it becomes artificially a high point, but they could easily strike those bristles and fly right through it. Now, you're not swatting at the bird, so I'm not trying to knock them out of the sky, but you're just trying to keep it between you and between you and the adult. So essentially, you've got me grabbing the eggs, and Ben Marks is behind me, and John Bates is there in the black, and then Dylan Maddox is it. So I had 4 people out there protecting me because I'm not dumb. Do they occasionally one gets through? Yeah. So this one got Ben in the head. That's why he's wearing a hard hat, not because if he falls 34 stories off the building is going to do him any good. It's in case one of the birds get through. Now, there is individual variance in levels of aggressiveness. So the previous female, we're at the same site, previous female, she was fairly aggressive, but you see how she landed and she just stayed there, and Stephanie was able to just keep her in place with keeping the broom between us. This current female will not land. She'll have nothing to do with that. The defense of the chicks, obviously they can't fly at you, but they have razor sharp talons and they know it. So what they do is flip on their back and they try to grab you with their foot. So they call that footing. It actually makes it easier to grab them because you could just you have a glove on, obviously, but you put your glove out and they'll grab at the fist and you could just sort of scoop them up. Sometimes we have the opportunities to grab the females. Obviously on that open roof, not so much, but here on the left, we're at UIC and we had an unbanded female and she wanted to come at you coming out. And so we were able to put the net out, and she just immediately grabbed that, and we could scoop her up. And we brought her in, banded her, and same advantage of why we band the young and everything we want to do for that. Sometimes the one picture on the right was on a balcony that we needed to do some work on, and we could just hang on to her in the moment while the little work that needed to be was done, and then let her go, and she was fine. So you're bringing the birds in, the crazy little cardboard, my high-tech equipment boxes, we're keeping them separated just so they don't jump on each other and hold on to each other, because remember those razor-sharp talons, they could do damage. You want to study as much as you can while you have them in hand. So we're going to obviously put the bands on. That's what's happening in the upper right picture. But the lower right, we're drawing a little bit of blood. You can be looking at genetics. You can be looking at bloodborne parasites. You could be looking at confirmation of what the sex is. So much we can learn from that blood sample. If the one on the lower left, that they have ectoparasites living on them, so that's feather mites or flies or that type of thing, we could collect those. We can take a little piece of down off the chicks and save that so we can look at isotopes. Again, we want to study as much as we can why we have the bird in hand. We want to take that opportunity. And then you put them back and the adults take them. If there was any risk that we wouldn't be doing it. Remember, banding is a luxury. So this is actually, we jumped ahead a few days, and we're getting close to about 30 days old here. When you get around, we're at 35 to 38 here. Most of the down is gone. You can see just on top of the heads or underneath the wings and that. They're very mobile at this point, all over the place. You've seen wing exercising a lot. You know, they're getting ready to take their first flights. Time-wise, we're now in June. We're in the mid-June time period. And they take their first flight. Using the word flight is very generous because they don't know how to fly. It's just a glide down to another level. It could be another level of a roof on the same building or across the way, or it could be down to the ground. Now, if we're up in Waukegan and you know, you're up there and it says it lands on the beach, it could sit there fine for hours undisturbed. The problem is, what do you do when it lands at Union Station during rush hour? Well, then we have to give it a little bit of help. So we're going to go out and get it. Keep in mind, these are young birds. They don't know to be defensive. They don't know to be scared. Not saying that it's easy to go pick one up, but it is easier than you would expect, and you can generally get them. And we're going to make sure they're fine. They go to Willowbrook Wildlife Center, make sure that with x-rays that they haven't fractured anything. And if we can, and they're banded and I know where the nest is, I can put them in the nest. Or if it's from a site that's inaccessible, it gives me the opportunity to band them and collect that blood sample, and then maybe put them on the roof of that building or the building next door. If they need to go through long-term rehab, essentially you're using the process of like you did with hacking. You're allowing them to stay at the rehab center where they can be in free flight chambers while they learn how to fly and hunt on their own, you know, for a number of weeks. And then when they're ready and they're able to dispatch a pigeon on your own, you can let them go. Before I get off this subject, though, I want to give a shout out to, there are a wonderful group of people, of volunteers, the Chicago Bird Coalition monitors, who do so much during migration and for migrants. They are also the ones that go out and help us get all the young peregrines that end up landing on the street in Chicago. There are also groups like the Sinisippi Audubon, like the Evanston Fledge Watch. They're just wonderful volunteers who essentially, this is my pair, this is the ones that I love, I'm going to watch all the time. And we know at the age, and you could see by the behavior and the way they look that it's getting their fledging. Then they volunteer and they sit on the street and they wait for them to take the first flight, and they track them where they go. And if they're in trouble, they bring them in. Just wonderful, wonderful people. Again, just like with the birds at Only Beach, now you're out flying. You're going to spend about 3 weeks with the parents, learning how to fly well. You see young doing a lot of what looks like fun learning behavior. And this with touching and tripping each other with talons, well, that's the same flight patterns you would be using for those food exchanges during courtship. It's the same flight pattern that you would come at each other if you were fighting for territorial defense. So it's a learning process for them. 3-4 weeks out of the nest and they have dispersed out away from the site. Just, we mentioned this before, if you want to look at where our young have shown up in the direction they go, you can see all the blue ones have stayed closer to Chicago, and I see a wider ranging out to where our females have gone. So we've gone through a season. The population over the years, and I don't have the year at the bottom, it's more of how many years I've been working with them, and we've just seen the population grow. They came off endangered species list for our state in 2015. They are off most. What do I want to wrap up with before we start talking about stuff? It's just some interesting things we see in what we deal with, some educational sort of things. Through webcams, everybody can watch peregrines, which are great, and it gives us an avenue for education as well. See the bird in the upper left? I got a lot of emails after that. People were watching that webcam of, oh my God, it's gone blind. And what do we do? And its eyelid is working wrong. And how can we help it? It's all out of concern for the bird, and it's wonderful. But hey, it's sleeping. Their eyelid doesn't go from the top down like ours. It goes from the bottom up, and it's covered with a fine down, and the bird is fine. And you diplomatically thank them for their concern, and you explain what's going on. Are any of these birds in trouble here? No. They lay down when it's hot. They'll spread their wings open while they're laying down and drape it over the edge just to get airflow on it. Yes, they'll go in the land on the ground and on the beach and take a bath. So there's a mistaken thought that raptors have to be in trees or something or up high. No, they'll go down to the ground. If they're on the ground, they don't walk like a normal stride, like you think of a dog running or something like that. If it's a hip-hoppy kind of walk, that can be the natural sort of walk pattern of a peregrine. I once told my sister when she was pregnant, she walked like a peregrine, and she smacked me. You can learn about peregrines with webcams, but you can learn about other species and stuff going on that we had both at our Savannah, excuse me, in our Romeo site. Coons steal the eggs, and after that happens, peregrines won't use it. I'm sure Jennifer is going to tell you the scary story about the great horned owl that showed up at Rockford, but luckily we didn't have a problem. And then you can see activity at night in the upper one left. There lies a question of, if they're feeding the young in the middle of the night, is that because they were hunting at night and light pollution became a factor and allows them to do that? Or is it because they can just go to that cache for food? Haha, we have another thing. We're going to have a wonderful movie at the end of the year in October that's going to talk about night activity of peregrines. All right, here's the thing. We're at the corner of Wacker, Michigan here, and we had a pair that nesting essentially in a gutter. You can see where one had circled. There was no really way to improve this gutter. The building was excited about having the birds in. What can we do to help them? So we put up a nest box. It was right above it. See the falcon that's on the urn? So they were in the box. They were checking out. And what do? They go and lay eggs in the old spot. They're wild birds. They do what they want. We could explain to them all we want to, that this is a better place to nest, but they're for whatever reason, they're going to do what they do. Remember, it's like controlling the dog, it doesn't work that way. We've been talking about mostly about the falcons, but back to like the St. Mary's roof, there's a lot of trying to help people and deal with them. This was the first time I had eggs show up in flower pots and that. So it ended up on this balcony, and the owners were really nice. They're like, yes, we're more than happy to let the peregrines use it. Now you can see the chicks are still in the flower pot. You see both adults are on the ledge. And I knew the chicks were going to get mobile and out of it. And they did, and then you get this problem. Now look at the age of them. So you you have a couple weeks before they fledge. It got a lot of worse looking than that. Well, I just never thought of it until somewhere in that time period of what we could do to help them. And now it's sort of again in a standard thing. People see peregrine eggs in there. We can't move them to protect the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, so we're going to have to get through the season. So how can I make that as easy for you as possible? And we'll tarp the balconies. You see, she's sitting in the flower pot. It's again back to pulling the eggs out from that female. She's going to stay tight on them. Stephanie is there being a blocker just in case, because you don't, want to assume that they're all going to be tolerant, or that as you move around, she won't reach a breaking point and say, I'm coming at you anyway. But actually, that works out really well. The building on a particular, balcony can say I want them, but when you've got them in high rises like this and just multiple balconies, well, if they're defensive all over the building, it has to be a sort of group agreement of, hey, we're going to close down our balconies and not go out during that sort of time period when the young are out and they're extremely defensive. By the way, they're usually more just defensive of things above them than below, because below they can watch and keep an eye out and make sure they're not a threat and coming closer. They just don't like things above them. So try to get the balcony. If you can't get the one with peregrines, get the one below. And that what I end up doing more so than you'd like is actually teaching people how to block them. I don't want them to do something stupid that's going to harm the birds, so we're going to help them, prevent them from using them for the next year. Because once the young are off the building and there's nothing on, there's no reason that people have the right to sort of change the structure of that building so they can't use them again. And I'd rather help them do it safely. So we remember when I was pulling the egg photo, that was the location you actually see on the left that is now covered with the netting. The building here was the one that we put the nest box up that she went back to the ledge. She moved to the other side and nested on that side for a number of years, but the ownership changed and it became a hotel. And I worked with the construction people and the architects to how can we design a way to keep them off this particular ledge. And the cones were a way to block it while that was going on. And netting is one of the things that works the best. We've talked about, and I'm sort of wrapping up here, population is up and they're doing fine. And that's true. But I've also been talking about how we've been helping them reach those levels. And it's not going to be as easy to do the amount we've been doing as we have in the past. Building codes have changed. You can no longer just set that box on that roof and wait with gravel. It now has to be anchored to some kind of structure. Because they've added that railing, we were able to attach it to the railing itself. And this was actually from, I think, yesterday or the day before. This is back to the St. Mary site. And you can, she's fine with that. If you look at places like I mentioned Waukegan, well, a lot of our Midwestern peregrines are using power plants. And as environmental issues change and we're closing down coal burning power plants, we're losing that as nest sites and that. So where is the population going to move as that happens? And one of the last things, shout out to all my great colleagues in the Midwest. Here's all your state coordinators and people working on them. Look at us all. You got a bunch of old, at least more than half of us are graying out and retiring. So as you move, your DNR and they're off the endangered species list, I can't work with that anymore. I now got to move to species that are more in trouble. Or as it gets time for me to retire, who's going to be that person that's the ambassador and liaison? So it'll be an interesting look 25 years from now where we're at. I have a feeling they're not going to be as handheld as they are now. And we might see a decline a little bit in the population, but I think they're going to be fine. So where can you reach out to find out more information than that? I've sort of left them up there, but you can pretty much Google it. We have a website. That's the Squarespace one, and we're on Facebook. We have links to the webcams, and there's great ones throughout the Midwest. And that a few of our local ones are not active yet. They sort of wait till the first egg is laid so we can see what column on the Evanston Library they're going to use and that. But they'll be on soon. And we have a few sites like the Evanston Public Library that will invite the public to a banding if you want to be able to see one up close. That's something to keep track of, and I would encourage you to not only follow their webcam, but to keep the library in mind as a place to come in. Just a couple things that, well, I haven't mentioned that we're going to deal with. We collect the adult eggs. I said that. And they come into research collection. We can look at embryonic mortality, and the lower left is difference, current way of measuring eggshell thickness and what we're able to look at. We're able to collect prey feathers to see what they've been feeding on. We no longer use DDT in the US. It was banned here, but we still make it and export it. So if they're feeding on neotropical migrants that winter in countries that use DDT, is it still making it into their system? So prey species are important to look at. And looking at the collection, here's something that other event that I want to have you guys keep in mind. We're going to have a behind the scenes at the Field Museum, so you can look at some of these study skins up close. And we'll talk a little bit more about what's going on with the egg studies. And I will give you that answer to that card that had the 1 through 5 and tell you what you were seeing there. All right. Last thing I'm ending on is homework for you guys. And the homework for all you guys are, like I said before, you're the eyes of the program in that you see the peregrines. When you got your spotting scope on and you see the peregrines, look at the legs. Look at the bands. There's so much we can learn. This is a little history of Louise and sort of a teaser back to Jennifer program of interesting on her, where she came from. And then, she was paired with a migratory male, and it was wintering over with a male that in another state that had a migratory female. Most of our adults stay year round, but we have some that migrate. She's now her current mate, Brian. They live there year round, but interesting history. But you can tell us and find out this by finding those bands. And you can find like the Montrose ones that everybody photographs at Montrose, and you like to bird there, but where is that pair nesting? I don't know, nearby. So Montrose homework. And the last thing, I couldn't do it without all the people and all more so than I could even show in this. This is the Chicago Peregrine program. It's not me. It's all these individuals, whether they're office workers that are across the street and monitor the falcons for me. They're the building engineers. They're the building managers. It's the tugboat guides, the rehab people. It's my colleagues that texted me 20 minutes before this program so I wouldn't miss it this time. We couldn't do it without all these people. And that's why Peregrines are back. It's all you guys. So that's it for me. I've been overly chatty. And like I said, I go on too much. I don't know, Edward, now, if you want to, I'll stop sharing the screen. If you want to ask through some of the chat questions that showed up, you might notice, or if you want to
let's do it.
Shout out, or
real quick though, round of virtual applause for Mary. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Let me scroll back here. We've had a very active chat here, so thank you all for that. Let's see. Shout out to the question, why is there no falcon emoji? Very valid question. I doubt Mary has the answer to that though.
we can create one.
So Chris Hansen, you had a question about the naming. You want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask that question?
I was just curious where the names come from. Is it just where did
Oh,
I'll just stop there.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. It's a combination. Mostly it's a way of me saying thank you to the building manager or that site to letting us to have the access and to work with the birds. Library puts it out to the public and you can vote on it. I think Rockford does that often too. Sometimes it's me, the one that was in the beginning. His name is actual Mouse, and he was, when we were banding, all his siblings were so vocal, and he was quiet as a church mouse, so he got that name. But it's all those people submitting it. I don't know how to make it a public thing. That might be something, Edward, we could talk about maybe for the, figuring out a way to have a COS ballot on one of them. Some of the sites, they don't care, or, especially ones that might come through rehab, a migrant, then we have a better chance of opening it to you, the public, to have a chance to name them.
Well, after doing it for a couple of years in a row with plovers, I'd say we're pretty much pros at this point. Let's do it.
Okay.
Maria McDonald, you had a question. You want to go ahead and unmute and ask it yourself?
Sure, Mary, thanks for such a really interesting program. I was just curious if your role is an official office related to the Endangered Species Act in Illinois, or like another arrangement.
It definitely falls in that other category. I've been very fortunate from the institutions that I work with. It used to be a Chicago Academy of Sciences, and I should shout out to them during the program that during the initial release phases, they were sort of coordinating it, and was a cooperative effort from Illinois Audubon and different organizations during that release process. But definitely after that, and since then, it's like that last slide. I'm as much a volunteer as every one of you guys doing it, with the caveat that the institution that I'm working for, and it was 2001 when I moved over to the Field Museum, that gives me the time and the space and whatnot to be able to do it. I still do my regular job, but it's like everybody else. It's sort of an ad hoc volunteer group. There is no formal organization. There is no salary. There is no funding. By the way, I shouldn't. That leads me into too many things when I get started. Funding wise, if anybody has a spare, $30,000-$40,000 that they have nothing, they don't know what they want to do with it. There's so many interesting projects we'd like to see in the future. Things like satellite tracking that you can do now that essentially work off the cell phones and the cell towers. The problem in the past with radio telemetry, the signal bounces off the buildings. But now that they're working off cell towers, it would be so cool to be able to put a few on our peregrines and just, like seeing Louise and her limited how she went, and that was relying on photographers and web cameras. You could surpass that and what you could do with that. But you're talking about something that's about $3,000 to $5,000 per bird, but I take it.
There you go. If anybody here happens to have a couple $1,000 laying around, let us know. Definitely would love to slap those on some peregrines. Jackie Fallon, you had a great question. You want to unmute and ask that?
Hey, Mary, great job on your talk. I always learn something when I listen to you. And you've been such a great resource and kind of leader of the Peregrine program in Illinois for so long. But what's your most memorable experience with the project? If you had to pick one that you would never, ever forget that experience, good, bad, or otherwise.
Jackie is my equivalent. Counterpoint in Minnesota, by the way, everybody. She is beyond me, and she has 3 times the amount of nests that we need to monitor and coordinate in cliff sites where they have to rappel down to be able to do that. She's phenomenal. And she asks the difficult questions because I don't know. There's so many things over the years of sad things that I wouldn't want to bring up. And then, we're ones if you guys have ever watched Jack Hanna's Animal Adventures, they did a filming in Chicago with the Peregrines, and I went to grab the chick out the window, and he grabbed the back of my jeans, and I thought it was gonna fall headfirst out the window because I wasn't expecting somebody to grab me like that. But and I look at the privilege of just the sites I've been able to go to. You want to talk a beautiful, okay, I know what it would be, and it's this one. The Uptown Theater, the first time we had that, is an old movie palace that's beautiful, but it needs restoration. It's been through hard times, and have wonderful people that are passionate about it and caretaking about it. And when we went out, they were nesting outside a fire escape. And when I went out to grab them, there were people watching from across the way that were yelling, "Don't touch those birds!" And you put back. And they had no idea what was going on. And, kudos to them for that. And normally that's fine. You do what you need to do and you go back and then you talk to them and you invite them to the next one in Saul Education. But because we were in the Uptown Theater and the caretaker Dave was showing us around, there was a whole little area for kids that was downsized, that had carousels and water fountains for low. And it just, we didn't emerge from that building till like an hour and a half later, and it's closed down and the front was locked. And the conservation police were waiting on the outside door. It's the only time I've ever had to show my permits that I was actually allowed to do whatnot, but because I was just being a gog over the movie palace.
I'm really excited to hear your answer to this question. Lauren Tamayakarn, sorry if I butchered your name. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
That's very close. You actually did a great job. Thank you, Mary. This was so interesting. My husband and I we moved to Chicago a couple of years ago and didn't know anything about the Falcons until then. So it's been pretty cool. And we live at 3800 North Lakeshore, and there's a pair that lives on our building. And we first wanted to know if they have names, and if so, what they are, if you know.
I unfortunately would have to Google that and see where the closest
we can
is.
Google.
Another way for people to figure out, do I know about that particular pair or not, is on my website. If you go under the seasonal activities, there's a territorial map. Now, each bullet is not exact because I don't want people to be able to go to that building and say, "Hey, I want to see the building." It's to protect the building personnel as much as it is the birds themselves. But
Sure.
you're in the neighborhood of where they are. And then you could see, hey, is the building I'm living in, is that one they know? The problem with knowing who they are to answer that question would be, hey, we haven't identified them. We're at the beginning of the year. So I could maybe, if it's known, tell you who it was last year, but I don't necessarily know for this year. But within that map, if I know that information, you could click on that bullet and it will give you the ID on the adults if we know it, and it will give you how many eggs have laid, or did they hatch, did they fledge, that sort of information.
I think I've heard they were on a documentary or something years ago that we haven't seen yet.
Are you seeing the activity now? That would be the thing. And you could always, you Google me, you'll get my email address and everything, and just say, hey, we're seeing them all the time here,
okay.
or whatnot, or talk to your, there can be a mistaken thing of, oh, they're nesting on it, but they're actually wintering on it. The old Edgewater Hotel is one of those sort of sites where it's a favored winter roost, but it's not a nesting one. And you think you have them because you see them quite often, but they're not nesting.
Okay. So. I know at some point they were out, they had a nest outside of one of our friends' places, and she could watch them. I'm not sure if they're there anymore. My second part of that question that I think Edward's probably interested in is how they actually dismember their prey, because we seem to find wings and heads We have a roof deck. We find wings and heads everywhere, and we've just been curious about that process, if it's not too grotesque to talk about.
Take a picture of it, because then we could sort of track what species they're, like that card
Oh,
that has
we
the
will
feathers on them.
Especially during the summer, we find a lot of them.
They are messy eaters. There's one thing of, am I starving or not? And what size of prey did I catch or not? They tend to pop the head off. And
Yes.
then they're going to, pull the wings out, pull the guts out, let them drop all over the place. Pluck, 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 pluck. And then eat the frying thing.
Right.
Now, I'm saying this a little bit from, I had an education bird for a number of years. She was permanently disabled. Molly was a great show bird because you could put her on the table, and we do this at members night at the museum, feed her a quail, and just the
Oh,
was
wow.
a ride to watch. Versus I have a red-tailed hawk as well, who is in their 30s, 30 this year. Anyway, I've had him since 97, 98, and he was 3 at that time. But they will just eat the feathers and eat the rest, and they're not as discerning as the peregrine. That is just, drop, drop, drop. So if you're hungry and you catch a cedar waxwing, you're going to eat more of the whole thing, but you catch a whole pigeon, and it's roughly a pigeon-sized bird a day, I would say. That's one of the things with the difference in the size is, they used to be called the duck hawk. Females can catch the larger prey in that. So you have a wider prey base.
Okay. Well, we will send pics when we find remains. So thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a few more about a couple of specific birds. Somebody's asking about the parrot St. Hyacinth in Avondale. Do you know anything about those birds?
They are on a basilica. Yeah, I don't have that open to. I believe they're both unbanded, if I'm remembering right. I know we don't have an ID that sticks out that we ID either of them. We haven't. They've been there for a couple of years, but we haven't seen any successful nesting from a distance. When you can't see into a ledge or a site, you're sort of going by, do young suddenly appear that are visible that way, or they're suddenly hanging out with immatures, or you could hear begging calls from the kids or them bringing food into that site. We're not seeing any of that. We know they're in that neighborhood, and like I said, if I'm remembering right, the closest we've got is that they're both unbanded.
I got another question here about some birds in Champaign. I guess they've been seeing an individual in downtown Champaign. Is there a history of nesting there, or another bird maybe there?
There's been a history of that being a winter site. But there may have nests. The part of the problem when you get further away from Chicago in the area, it's not something I drive down to randomly check out. Kankakee tends to be one where you see a lot, but we haven't confirmed nesting, so I don't know if it's wintering use. We do have them nesting down in Peoria. We've had one in Decatur and Decatur, and so they are nesting further south, but I can't confirm any nesting pair at this point down there. There's always more I don't know than I know.
Janet, you go ahead and ask your question. Sorry, I didn't see that.
Oh,
Hi,
I was
Mary.
just, yeah, Mary, sorry, I know this is, since you missed it, but, EPA's Great Lakes National Program Office does requests for proposals on an annual basis. Maybe you've already explored that pot of money, but it's something I want to make sure you knew about.
It's I thank you for that. I haven't done a lot of exploring for one point is because I need to get it in the permits, and that actually I've got it in the state one. The problem is adding in a permission to put on satellite trackers from the bird banding lab, and this came before COVID. and I did get a donation to help towards that sort of project. But then they wanted not just to be trained virtually, they want you to be able to go to workshop. But then we had COVID and there was nobody going to any ornithological meetings or any of that going on. So we sort of put that on the back burner and then switched the money that was donated to the egg study that we're going on. But it's something we'll keep in mind for the future. And I thank you for that.
All right. So with that said, thank you all so much for coming. Thank you again, Mary, for your expertise and your time this evening. Really, really appreciate it. Welcome to the year of the Peregrine, y'all. It's off. So with that said, definitely hop over to the website. We got a lot of great trips and events coming up throughout the year. Keep checking it because I'm honestly always adding new stuff. It seems like you add one event and then all of a sudden everyone has to do all kinds of events. So definitely check that out. Stay connected. If you sign up to get emails from us on our homepage, we'll also keep updated that way so we can send things directly to your inbox with updates on when those things go live. But thank you all once again for joining us this evening. Have a great night, great week, whatever the weather brings this week. Enjoy it all the same. And we will see you guys on the next one.